In two recent sermons, Temptation Part 2, and both of these we mentioned, and I'm going to restate something that I stated in both of those. He, meaning Satan, he deceives us. He puts temptation in front of us, and the Bible tells us exactly what different categories they can be put into. And if you would go with me to 1 John 2 and verse 16. 1 John 2, verse 16. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And you see, brethren, John was warning the church. And that's an important thing to understand. He was warning the church about God's dangerous battlefield, and that battlefield, of course, is the world. And so here in 1 John 2 and verse 16, John divided Satan's worldly temptations and seductions into these three categories. And brethren, I am sure that all of us would agree that we are living in a world that is completely immersed or saturated with sin. All we got to do is look around. I mean, I know we can go, yeah, but this is not so bad and this is not so. If you stand back and actually be honest and take a look, it is drenched, totally drenched, drowned in sin. Go with me to 1 John chapter 5 and verse 19. 1 John 5 verse 19. We know that we are of God. He's talking to the church, and there's an implied, and we know that the whole world lies in wickedness. The NIV states that last part, this world. The whole world is under the control of the wicked one or the evil one. We also know, brethren, that this wicked one uses every possible means he has to bring us as believers under his control. I mean, after all, he already has the world. So who is he after? He's after us. And brethren, that is a very important point to understand and to know. So with that in mind, I'd like for us to briefly take a look at these three categories. And I mean briefly, I mean very briefly. And we're going to look at them 1, 2, 3. Number one, the lust of the flesh is everything that appeals to the carnal physical appetite. Now, there's a lot of different ways of going into a whole lot of detail on every one of these. And like I said, this is brief. So in this category, Satan uses our own legal desires. I mean, legal desires such as food and drink and even sexual fulfillment within marriage. He uses this particular category to tempt us with illegal carnal passions, such as gluttony, drunkenness, fornication, those kinds of things. Number two, the lust of the eyes is everything that appeals to the eyes, to our eyes, and we could even include our hearing in that, to everything our desiring, our demanding, our greedy, our never full demands. Go with me to Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 8. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 8, just to be part of the verse, and it says, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear fulfilled with hearing. It's never full, neither one of them. We always want to see more. And a lot of that seeing and a lot of that hearing is good and right. And a lot of that is not good and right. And that's what he uses. So in this category, in the lust of the eyes, Satan uses external attractions that could be either good or bad. Things like desire for a house, desire for a car, or desire for a neighbor's wife, to produce covetousness. Number three, the pride of life is everything that appeals to haughtiness, arrogance, pride, lifting up, puffed up, all of those kinds of things. And in this category, Satan uses thinking. We think about it, we analyze, we come to the conclusion of personal achievements. We're looking at self. I mean, things like popularity, academic success. I'm prettier than you are. I'm richer than you are. I have a bigger house than you have. Whatever it is, all of these kinds of things. And it is that kind of attitude that he is trying to produce and using the temptations that he does in this particular category. No. So please understand and realize, brethren, when a person reaches this category, the pride of life, there really is no longer a battle against the flesh. What I mean by that is Satan has won both the sensual and the intellectual battle. Go with me, if you would, to the book of Nehemiah or Nehemiah, chapter 9 and verse 16, Nehemiah 9, verse 16. But they, and it's meaning the children of Israel, the Israelites, but they and our fathers dealt proudly and hardened their necks and hearken not to your God, to your commandments. And brother, what I want us to understand, this one verse, this is pride of life. This is what is being described here. So today we're going to look a little bit further into one of these categories, and the one we're going to look into is the pride of life, especially look into the word pride. I have entitled this message, Looking at Pride. There are at least 80 different passages in the King James Bible that refer to the word pride. And there are at least 46 different occurrences of the word pride in the King James Version. Today we're going to be reading some of these. And the purpose for reading probably a little more than normal of some verses is to expose this topic to the light of day. And please don't worry, we're not going to read all of them. We're going to read just some of them. And brethren, as we get started, I want to make this statement. I know this is one of those big, important biblical topics that we really don't want to talk about. And if we really be honest with ourselves, it is also one of those topics that we don't want to necessarily hear sermons on either. And so with that in mind, let's begin. Please go with me to Isaiah chapter 2. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 11. Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 11. The lofty looks of men shall be humbled. The haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. That's what's going to happen to the pride of life. It's just describing what is going to happen to it. Proverbs 11 and verse 2. Proverbs 11 and verse 2. When pride comes, then comes shame. Several translations say, then comes disgrace. But with the lowly, or with the humble, or with those who are coupled with humility, is wisdom. I want us to look now at both the Hebrew and the Greek words on this particular word. So the Hebrew word for pride means exhortation, arrogance, lifting up. And then with the Hebrew, the word for pride means excessive shining. And then by that, what it is talking about, it means self-exhortation or self-absorption. It's me, me, me. This is where that all comes from. And by definition in the Hebrew, in the Greek, it carries its own self-destruction vanity, its own self-destructive vanity. In other words, just from the Greek word, the end result of this is, it's going to end in destruction when it's used in the bad way. That's the point. Also, with the Greek word for pride, we get pride, haughtiness, arrogance, and all of these various synonyms for it show the characteristic of a person when he is self-exalted, when he estimates his own powers or his own goodness or his own beauty or his own whatever it is that he has or he thinks that he has. And as a result, he looks down and he despises and he has contempt for everyone else. The Greek word is also where we get our English word hubris. The word means excessive confidence or arrogance, conceit, haughtiness, pride, vanity, self-importance, self-conceit. And with that, go with me to 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 5. 1 Peter 5, verse 5. Likewise, you younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resists the proud, and God gives grace to the humble. So, which side of this do you want to be on? Which side of this do we want to be on? We want to be humble. We want to be looking to God, and we want to be receiving his grace because we are part of those who are humble. Notice with me what Jesus states to his disciples. This is to the 12 disciples in particular, over in Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, beginning in verse 20. Mark 7, verse 20. And he, Jesus, said, that which comes out of a man that defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. So he labels right off. He says it's evil. Pride. This is just part of this list. All these things come from within and defile the man. I want us to also understand that pride is often this is more, I'm talking about in theological terms, not so much in everyday language. It wouldn't be necessarily referred to as this, but in theological terms, it is often referred to as the first sin. So if you're reading along at something that says the first sin, what they're referring to, the first sin, this is the sin that was committed by Satan way back when. So let's go to Ezekiel 28, verse 17. So referring to it as the first sin, it is referring to the first sin that was done by Satan. Ezekiel 38, 17. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Isn't this exactly what I was stating when we talked about the term? It's part of the definition of it in both the Hebrew and the Greek. You have corrupted your wisdom by reason of your brightness. I will cast you to the ground. I will lay you before kings that they may behold you. And brethren, please understand, it was the same sin that he used in his deception of Adam and Eve when he tempted them through the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, drawing them away from their close-knit relationship that they had with God. Remember, they walked with God. They talked with God in the cool of the day. They spent time with God. This God being, we know that was a being who became Jesus Christ, but here's a God being before he emptied himself, walked around, talked with them, and they got deceived. They fell trap to this through this particular sin. Go with me to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 3, verses 5 and 6. Genesis 3, verse 5. For God does know, this is Satan talking to them. For God does know that in the day you eat thereof, this is the tree that God had said, don't eat of it. Satan is telling them, for God does know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw, three categories here, things happen here. All three of them are describing the different categories. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that's lust of the flesh, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, that's lust of the eyes, and a tree desired to make one wise, it's pride of life. She took of the tree thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. They all or both fell trap to the seduction of Satan through all three of the categories, but the one that really did it was the pride of life. And please realize, brethren, Satan still uses this to tempt us today with the very same sin called pride. This sin is also sometimes referred to as the great sin. This is in theological language and theological writings. And the reason is because this is my words, because it's the path. Get you onto that path that leads to all other sins. Now that's an important point to understand too. So we ask, why is that? Why is that? The answer is because pride is the lifting up of self above authority. It is lifting up self above all authority, even the authority of God. Isaiah 14 in verse 14. Isaiah 14 in verse 14. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. And brethren, that is so interesting. And the reason I say this is so interesting is because that is what he stated back in Genesis 3 and verse 5 to Eve. For God knows that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as God, knowing good and evil. That's exactly, he states this. That's the sin. And this is exactly what he told Eve. And she ate, and her husband with her did eat. Obviously, this is so contrary to God and God's word of instructions to us. Go with me to 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5. 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5. Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. We're told that we're to cast everything down that is going to lift us up higher than the knowledge of God. I like the way it's stated in the New Living Translation. It says, we destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. And now let's continue in this verse, 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5, in the same verse, and going back to the King James, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. In other words, here's the point. We're to cast down everything that is going to come against us, that's going to try and lift us up against anything that is contrary to God and God's way of life. No, we cast it down and we bring it into captivity to obeying Jesus Christ, the word of God. That's the solution. That's what we're to do. The kind of move on here. The British writer, you may have heard of, C.S. Lewis, who was an atheist, university professor, agnostic, became what many people would refer to as a lay theologian. He became so devoted to God, and it's just like this. I don't know that God called him. I don't know that God was working with him, but it's an interesting thing because I see some things and similarities to this man and the Apostle Paul. How much he hated what God was saying. Now he comes and he's this incredible teacher on things about God. Anyway, I have a quote. One of his quotes was, quote, "We are all tempted by pride, and yet we despise it in all others." And then there's a second quote that I want to give you, and it's all part of the same writing. Pride cannot exist without competition because pride, is essentially competitive. You got to think about that. Well, I want to show you that that actually is true. And I think this is interesting. And the reason it's interesting is because that is exactly what Satan used on Adam and Eve. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. You're in a competition. If you don't think about that as being competitive, then you don't really understand what it means to be in competition. What do you mean you're going to be like God? We're never going to be like God, in the sense that this is referring to. Because what this did was it was motivating them to become greater in their own eyes, thinking beyond, we're much bigger than, we know more, we're brighter than, or whatever term you would want to use here, than God had created them to be. They were not created to be in the place of God. They were created to be children of God. That's an important point. Brethren, it is also interesting to look how the dictionary defines the word. Webster gives 6 different definitions for the word pride. I'm going to read you 3 of them, and then we're going to kind of focus on this. Number 1, the quality or state of being proud, as in ordinary self-esteem or conceit, or a reasonable or justifiable self-respect or delight arising from some act, passion, or relationship. In other words, like parental pride. You said all of that to state, parental pride. Number 2, proud or disdainful behavior or treatment. That's not good. Number 3, a flamboyant display. Now, go with me to 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 6. 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 6. And these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes, that you might learn in us not to think of men above that which written, that no man be of you be puffed up for one against another. He said, I want you to take a look at us, that we're trying to give you an example that we're not being puffed up. I mean, that's what he's saying. And then Galatians chapter 6 and verse 4, Galatians 6 verse 4, but let every man prove his own work, and then shall have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. Now, we ask, is there a lesson for us on pride from these verses? And the answer is yes. The lesson is, pride relies on competition, and without competition, there is no pride. Remember the quote of C.S. Lewis? This is exactly what Paul is saying. So, with that, go with me to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 12. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 12. For we commend not ourselves again to you, but give you occasion to glory on our behalf, that you may have somewhat to answer them which glory in appearance and not in the heart. Is there a lesson, and what is the lesson that we can see from pride on this verse? Pride is, Paul is stating that we're not trying to show honor on ourselves or of ourselves to you. However, we are giving you the opportunity to take pride in us, so that you can answer those who take pride in what is seen rather than what is of the heart. So let's understand, pride in another is not necessarily evil, like parental pride. Of and by itself, that's not a sin. That's not evil. Also, I want us to understand we need to be. We should be proud of those who remain steadfast in God's way of life. So we honor those people even when they have died, who stood faithful. Did they commit any sins? Of course, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. It's not about these people when we honor them, and that's what we're trying to do in doing that. This is a good way to do it. And it goes back to the first definition that we gave. Now, go with me now, if you would, to 2 Corinthians 7, and we're going to read one verse in 2 Corinthians 7, then we're going to read another verse in 2 Corinthians 8, and both of these are going to be from the Amplified Bible, and you'll see them together. 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 4, Amplified Bible. Great is my confidence in you. Great is my pride in boasting on your behalf. I am filled to the brim with comfort. I am overflowing with joy in spite of all of our troubles. And then we go immediately then to 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 24. This also is from the Amplified. Therefore, show these men and the sight of the churches the proof of your love and our reason for being proud of you. We need to be proud of someone else and still be in God's will. It is okay. However, then on the other side of that coin, when a person is separated outside, apart from God's will, they tend to take pride in what is seen. And by that, we mean the physical aspects of life as opposed to the spiritual aspects of life. So we can be proud in someone else, and that in itself is good. So this is a wide topic. This is the whole point in making all of this statement. This is why I'm saying this. Brother, what we need to realize is pride is not love. And pride is not something that is beautiful to God. And love is beautiful to God. This is something that is not beautiful to God, and therefore pride is sinful. We're told over in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we call it the love chapter. In verse 4, it says charity, and I'm going to read the word here, love. Love suffers long, love is kind, and envies not. Love, I can't even read my own writing. I just wrote it over here. I didn't have it filled out. It doesn't what to itself? Parade itself or lift up itself. Or, yeah, it says, vaunts not itself. And the last part says, love is not puffed up. So it's not love. So it's not beautiful to God. So it's sin. Now, with that, go with me to Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 4. Proverbs 21 and verse 4. A high look and a proud heart and the plowing of the wicked is sin. Psalm 10 and verse 4. Psalm 10 and verse 4. The NIV. In his pride, the wicked man does not seek him, does not seek God. And all his thoughts and all the wicked man's thoughts, there is no room for God. Remember, I told you earlier we're going to read some of those 80 different passages that refer to in some way or another the word pride. We're looking to see what God has to say on this huge topic. We're going to read some of those verses. We're going to read several. Some, and I don't have them in any particular order as to why I have them in the order I have them. I just have them in this order. Psalm 138, verse 6. 138, verse 6. Though the Lord be high, yet has he respect unto the lowly, but the proud he knows afar off. In other words, he knows from a distance. Proverbs 21, verse 24. Print 21, 24. Pride and haughty scorner is his name, and who deals with proud wrath. Proverbs 16, verse 19. It is better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoils with the proud. Proverbs 8 and verse 12. Proverbs 8 and verse 12. I, wisdom, deal with prudence. I find knowledge of witty inventions. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Pride and arrogancy and the evil way or the evil behavior and the froward mouth or the perverse speech do I hate. Proverbs 16 and verse 5. Proverbs 16:5. Everyone that is proud of heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished. In other words, they can all join together all day long. They want it. They're going to be punished. They're going to be punished. The person who is proud is going to come, they're coming down. I still have a few more. We're not anywhere close to 80. Proverbs 18 in verse 12. Proverbs 18 in verse 12, and I'm reading this from the Complete Jewish Bible. Before being ruined, a person's heart is proud. Before being honored, a person must be humble. Romans 12, verse 16. Romans 12, 16, NIV. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. 2 Timothy 3, verse 1. Know this also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves. Isn't that describing pride of life already? Yes. Covetous, boaster, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than the lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away, or have nothing to do with them, which is exactly what we read earlier in Psalm 138 in verse 6. But the proud he knows afar off. He doesn't get close to it because it is evil and he doesn't have anything to do with evil. So, here what I want to do is I want to mention 3 different recorded, because we don't have everything that Jesus did in his life or associated with him, recorded, but we have some things. But we have 3 different recorded occasions where Jesus' 12 disciples argued about who is going to be greatest in the kingdom. And there's a lesson from this. I'm not trying to put these men down. They're here for us to learn from, and I just, want to learn, because here's the point. All three of these are examples of pride of life. Like I said, I'm not going to read them, just going to give you the 3 points, and I'm going to put the verses with it, make some comments, but we're not going to really read all of this. Number 1, Luke 9:37 through 49. This is where the people tell Jesus, we tried to get your disciples to cast out demons and they couldn't do it. And immediately after this, he starts telling the disciples, I'm just trying to draw your attention to what he says. He says, I'm going to be betrayed. And immediately afterwards, they started talking about who's going to be great in the kingdom. The second one, this happened at the night of the Passover. This is in Luke 22, verse 20 through 30. He tells them what is going to happen. And here at the Passover, they start talking about who's going to be greatest. And then a third one is in John 10. I'm sorry. Number 3 is Mark 10. Mark 10, verses 33 through 45. This is where James and John ask if they can sit one on the right hand and one on the left hand of Jesus in his kingdom. And they all got upset by all of this. Now, he had just told them, Jesus had just told them, what was going on. And he said, we're going to go into Jerusalem and I'm going to be betrayed and I'm eventually going to be killed. Now, that's what the healed. And the next verse says, and then James and John comes to it. There's no indication that there's any break. There's no indication that it wasn't weeks afterwards either. We don't know. But it's immediately after they come and they say, can we be one on the right hand and one on the left hand in your kingdom? And the others got indignant about it and all of that. So let me ask you this question after pointing these out. With this timing, I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be killed. Can I be first in the kingdom? I'm going to be betrayed. We're going to be killed. With all of that, can I be first? Who's going to be greatest? 3 different occasions. And I said, these are the recorded ones. I don't know if other happens. I just what we know. So with this timing in mind, do you, and I mean you individually, do you think this is interesting that these 12 men who had walked and talked and studied and ate and slept where Jesus did for 3.5 years, these men would argue about who is going to be greatest in the kingdom? They were occupied with pride of life, and as a result, they miss some important information. And I want to point out at least 3 things that they obviously missed that I want us to get from this. And the three lessons is, number 1, they missed the type of kingdom that Jesus was referring to. They missed that he was referring to a spiritual kingdom and not a physical kingdom. They missed that. The second one is they missed the fact that Jesus was still going to be their leader. And then the third one, they missed that serving others really is the correct model. They missed those things. They missed Jesus teaching them. And he's concluding in every occasion where he's telling this, and I'm going to be betrayed and I'm going to be destroyed and I'm going to be killed. And well, can I be first in your kingdom? They missed all of this. It's recorded for us so that we don't miss it. So I think, brethren, we need to ask a question here. If these men, and you can also probably put in Adam and Eve, who walked and talked with Jesus, and they knew who he was. I mean, they were so intimate with Jesus and, the God being who became Jesus. You know what I'm saying? They missed all of this, that they gave into it. These men, if these men had problems with pride of life, where do we stand? Where do we stand? I mean, we're all vulnerable to yielding to the sin of pride. What I want to do now is I want to read some verses that give us, that present to us the right attitude that we need to have when it comes to pride. There are many others. I had a whole list of them, and I cut way more than half of that I had in my notes out. So I'm just reading some. Philippians 2 and verse 3. Philippians 2 verse 3. Let nothing be done through strife or vain glory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. If we did just this verse, there would be no pride of life. It's not possible. It's not possible. The next one I have is Proverbs 27:2. Proverbs 27:2. Let another man praise you and not your own mouth, a stranger and not your own lips. If we did this, there would be no pride of life. The third one I have, we read this one earlier, so it's a reread, but it's 1 Peter 5 verse 3. Likewise, you younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yes, all of you be subject one to another, clothed with humility, for God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. Romans 12 and verse 3, Romans 12 verse 3, for I say that the grace given unto me to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. Remember what I told you, it's the lifting up. Well, if we don't lift ourselves up, we're not going to have a problem with pride. And this is saying, don't do this. Now, what is Romans 12 verses 1 and 2? Just think about it, and then this verse is on the heel of that. Proverbs 8 and verse 13. Proverbs 8 verse 13. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride, and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the forward mouth do I hate. Proverbs 3 verse 33. Proverbs 3:33. Surely he scorns the scorners, but he gives grace unto the lowly. I have one more here. Daniel 5 and verse 20. Daniel 5 verse 20. But when his heart was lifted up. Now he's describing a particular person. This is the king. And when his heart was lifted up, that's pride, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. There's a lesson there. So, after looking at all of this, I think another question that I think is very obvious that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, we know what the problem is. So, is there a cure to the problem? Is there any kind of solution? Is there, maybe even use the word, is there some kind of antidote to all of this? Brother, when we find ourselves yielding to the temptation of pride, of being prideful, of being bigger in our own eyes than we really are. I didn't say if, did I? I said when. So am I implying this is a problem that we pretty much all have at some point in one way or another? Yeah, and let me put it this way. If you don't think you have this problem, you have the problem. But if we find ourselves giving into temptations of pride, being prideful, bigger in our own eyes than we really are, then we need to read and reread those 80 different passages that I didn't read all of them, but we need to go through and make a study of all of the passages we find in the pages of the Bible that talk about this issue. Then once you've done all of that, because remember I told you, this is a subject we don't want to hear, we don't want to talk about, and we certainly don't want to give a sermon on. And so I said, so let's get started in it, meaning we're going to. When you go through all of that, and do I actually mean going through all of that? 100%. That's what I mean. We're looking for a cure for this. We got the disease. We want the cure. We read all of this